So the narrow question that we have is the one you see here. So how should we understand and consequently measure the badness of inequality? Exactly that thing that we talked about yesterday. That would be the narrow question. The broader question is this. Is this a question for economists, or is it a question for philosophers? So this is my hidden agenda, as it were. Because the study of the measurement of inequality has been the privilege of, so far, of economists. And I want to say that we philosophers have some important input in that as well. So bear that sort of, let's call it the meta question in the back of your head for this lecture. So here's a good place to start. Some of you might be familiar with this example or thought experiment. So remember, what we're trying to do today is we're trying to measure the badness of inequality. So compare different societies, different countries that are unequal, and say, this is worse than that, right? So Mexico is better than Guatemala with regard to inequality, say. So here's a good way to kick the discussion. So here we have three different societies, A, B, and C, okay? As you can see, can we, like yesterday, turn off just this one?
La de aquí, para que se pueda ver la...
Yeah. We have three societies, A, B, and C. As you can see, they are very unequal, okay? But still, I might be interested in knowing which one is, yeah, perfect. No, the opposite. I might be interested to know, yeah, this is good.
Así.
Which one of them is more unequal, okay? Let's start with C, okay? C, I can give you a bit more color and background, and this might help you to tease out your intuitions about which one is worse with regard to inequality. So C, for example, we can think of it as Middle Ages Europe, right? So feudalist system, you have the king or the aristocracy, right? 1.1% of the population living very good lives, and you have the rest of the people living in abject poverty. Whenever I think about it, I have in mind, you know this Monty Python movie, not Life of Brian, the other one, The Holy Grail, right? There's a scene there where the king rides and the peasants are digging in the dirt. That's the image I have for Society C. A paradigmatic case of inequality, right? Okay. Notice that all societies are equal in terms of population, right? So 1,000, could be 1,000 or it could be a factor of a million, right? Or something like that. So, or 10 or 100,000, doesn't really matter. So that was Society C. Think now of Society B. Society B could be something like the south of the US in the 50s, right? So the Jim Crow era, right? So in the south of the US, the whites are living it up, and the blacks have half of the well-being of the whites. Classic case of inequality, right? What could be more unequal than that? Or you could think of A. I'd like to think of it as my own country, as Israel, where the 99% of the population have a high standard of living. And here you have the Bedouins. Have you heard of the Bedouins in Israel? It's a segment, it's a nomadic people, Muslim. So We have the Palestinian society in Israel. 20% of Israelis are Palestinians. Of these 20%, there are the Bedouins, who are these nomadic people. No housing, no jobs, in the sun and in the heat during the summer, and the cold during the winter. So again, a classic case of inequality. Which one is worse? Right? It's a good question. Show of hands.
Which one is worse?
Which one is worse with respect to inequality? So how many people say C? Raise your hand. Okay, good. How many people think B is the worst in terms of inequality? Interesting. How many people think A is the worst in terms of inequality? Okay. Unusual result, I have to say. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. The Gini Coefficient, of which you've probably heard, actually disagrees with the most of you. The Gini Coefficient tells us that B is the worst society with regard to inequality. Okay? There are various measurements of inequality. The Gini is probably the most famous of them. It says this. Why does it say that? Because when we talk about approaches to measuring inequality, you could, roughly speaking, distinguish between two broad categories of how to measure inequality. So the additive measurement and the average measurement. It sounds fancy, not fancy at all, very simple. The additive measurement says that I'm just going to take pairs of individuals who are unequal to each other, and I'm going to add them up. Okay? So this individual is unequal with that individual. How many relations of inequality are there in this society? A? How many relations of inequality are there in society A?
A few.
No?
999. This guy, this poor guy, is unequal to this guy and that guy and that guy and that guy. 999 relations, pairwise, you know the term pairwise? Pairwise relations of inequality. Same here, right? Just goes the other way. Here it is, who's good in math? I think it is 24,995, something like that. Okay? The additive measurement adds up relations of inequality. How many are you guys in Mexico these days? 90,000? 90 million? 127. Okay. So you take each person, right, and you measure them to the person to whom they're unequal, and you add them up. That's the additive measurement. The average measurement just takes these and does an average between them. So the famous Gini coefficient is an average measurement. And because it is an average measurement, it says that this is the worst. Okay? The average of the gap here is the worst, as opposed to C and A. So things are worse with regard to inequality when we are in B, but they are improved, right? Think of average of gaps. They improve when we move to either A or C. So far, so good. Okay? Any questions about that? I have to tell you something. So when I was promoted, last time I was promoted to full professor, so I don't know if you have that in Mexico, but the dean invites you, and it's a ceremony, and they read out the evaluations that people from abroad in your community, they wrote about you. flattering things, he's great, he's fantastic, good looking, no, not a good looking, set it aside. One of them said, and I will never forget this, very good philosopher, I wish he didn't spend so much time on equality. When I heard that, I burst out laughing, okay? Because, for example, one of my heroes, Tony Atkinson, who is, I don't know if he's I think he's a Nobel Prize winner, he just spent 40 years of his life just on these issues, on equality. So it was funny for me to hear, why does he spend? Equality is huge, okay? All right, so we said, you want to measure inequality? Two rough categories. There's many indices. There's the Gini, there's the Atkinson measurement, many measurements, but they fall into these two broad categories. Either you add the gaps, right? There's a gap between me and Juan. You take that, you add it up, or you take those gaps and you do an average between them. So far, so good. Economists, they like Gini. They love Gini, okay? By the way, Gini is not an acronym. It's actually a name. It's the name of an Italian mathematician. Economists, they like Gini, but some of us think that there's a problem with Gini. Here's the first one, okay? Think of this example. What happens here? Here you have three societies, A, B, and C. Anybody can see what's common to them?
They have the same proportion of
Exactly. So the gap is the same, and the proportions are the same. So in a sense, when you move from A to B to C, you've just enlarged the population. So we can think of them as three different countries, right? You could think of this as, give me a small country today that's very unequal. Maybe
El Salvador.
San Salvador. Sorry? Guatemala, okay. And give me a very big country that's extremely unequal. Brazil, Mexico. Good. So I don't know if the proportions are exact, but this would be a good example. So you want to ask yourself, how do they compare? Gini says exactly the same. They are exactly the same. Do you remember why? Why would Gini say that these are exactly the same with regard to inequality? This is basic math.
The average is the same?
Because the average is the same, exactly. All we care about is average, right? This is the economist mind. Okay. Here's an interesting way of thinking about it. Think of it not as three different countries, but think of it on a time scale, right? So this is Mexico 100 years ago, when you guys were small, and during 100 years, the society grew, population grew steadily and steadily. But what happened to the inequality? Stayed the same. When we philosophers look at it, we say, hey, things are actually going worse with regard to inequality. This is a very important point. If you have a society and it is extremely unequal, and over time the society grows and grows and grows, but the inequalities between whites and African Americans in the US, right? Society is prosperous society and it grows. The inequality between the whites and the blacks stays the same. We think that things have gone worse with respect to inequality. Gini doesn't capture that intuition, if you have that intuition, because Gini says things are exactly the same with regard to inequality. So this is the first problem for Gini. So there's something.
The reason being that there are more people affected by those inequalities.
That would be breaking it down why do we have that intuition? But I'm saying even before that, we've started from a very bad position, and the society progressed over a long time, and it hasn't addressed the inequality. The inequality stays the same, even though the society, it grows bigger. So things have gone worse with respect to inequality. Not everybody shares this intuition. I have this intuition. I'm trying to convince you of it. If you think I'm correct, that means there's a problem with Gini, or there's a problem with average measurements. Okay. First important lesson. If you accept what I have said so far, that means a very important distinction. It means that there's a distinction between measuring inequality and measuring the badness of inequality. This is a huge point that I cannot go too much into. It's part of my debate with economists. If you know, have you heard of Gary Becker? One of the most famous economists of the 20th century. Gary Becker, people idolize him. What he did is he invented like a ruler, measurement tape, and he goes around, economists go around measuring things. They measure crime, they measure discrimination, they measure even inequality in marriage prospects between short man and tall man, everything like that. It's an expansion of economy. We want to tell them, before you measure anything, you need to know what you measure, okay? This is the general lesson. With respect to inequality, don't go about measuring inequality before what? Who wants to try? What do you need to know before you go out and measure inequality? You need to know what makes inequality bad. Before you know that, there's no point measuring inequality. So all of these indices, all of these economists' indices are premature. You need to know what you're measuring. So if you accept this, then you accept that the job of the philosopher comes before the job of the economists. Yes. Okay? So first philosophy, then economics. I'm not saying economics is not important. It is very important. But we need to tell them what to look for. You cannot just go out there and measure things without knowing what you're measuring. Let me say this one more time in a different way. Economists measure inequality because they assume, and that's a good thing, they assume that it is a bad thing. So they want to measure it across countries, okay? But they did that before knowing what is it that makes inequality bad. And I want to show you, I want to prove to you that understanding what makes inequality bad affects the way in which you measure inequality. Okay. Things have gone wrong for Gini, okay, the most famous economist index. Okay, where did things go wrong? Here's a clue. So look what's going on here. Here we have a sequence, another sequence. It goes from A, B, then it could be C, D, D, all the way to Z. Okay? And what happened is that we started from two individuals, very unequal to each other, and as we progressed, we added another person at a time, a better off person. We've added, and we ended up in this situation. Okay? Gini says that Z is the best option in terms of inequality. And that's okay. That sort of makes sense because, there's a lot of equality here. There's only this one person who sort of ruins the almost perfect egalitarian society that we have here. Fair enough. But now compare A with B. In comparing A with B, Gini says that B is better than A with respect to inequality. But that's a little bit strange. Can anybody see why that's a little bit strange? I know it's getting a little bit technical, but can you see why that verdict would be a little bit strange? Anybody wants to try?
Is there more with a high level?
That's one of the things, but focus on inequality, relations. Remember, we talked about relations of inequality.
There are two relations of inequality on B, and just one in A.
Perfect. That's exactly it. Gini says B is better than A. But how can that be? There is twice as many inequalities in B as there are in A. In A, there's only one inequality. In B, there's two inequalities. Here's one, and here's two. Bad, bad, bad. Okay? So some people thought, okay, we know where things go wrong for Gini. Here's a way to correct things. The way to correct it is this. So far, we thought just about inequality and the badness of inequality. So on the additive, you remember we had the additive, adding, and the average. On the additive, what we added was relations of inequality. The more relations of inequality and the greater the gap, the worse the society is in terms of inequality. What we need, said some people, is to take that number, which would have a minus, and to balance it with relations of equality, for which we'll give a positive number, okay? So if a society, go back, okay? So here, there's all these relations of equality, right? This guy to that guy, and that guy to that guy, so forth and so forth. We will give this a positive number. From this, we will subtract all the relations of inequality. So this guy with all these 999 guys, okay? That would give us a number. Here, we will we have one relation of equality, that's a plus, but we have two relations of inequality, that's a minus, okay? Where does this leave us? So far, philosophers thought, we'll just add relations of inequality, we'll have a minus. The smaller the minus, the better the country with regard to inequality. Now these guys are saying, and it's not an accident that their name is positive egalitarians, you got to balance the bad with the good, with the positive aspect. So take relations of equality. If the working class in Mexico, if there's a huge working class of 20 million people, and they live in equality to one another, that's a plus, okay? You will add these numbers, and you will subtract that figure from all the huge inequalities between this working class Mexicans and the rest of the country. So we have a more balanced measurement of inequality. Remember what I said before about the economists and the philosophers? You have to know what you're measuring in order to measure. You cannot just go around with a tape, measuring tape, and measure things before you know what is good and what is bad about this, okay? So this thing, this positive egalitarianism, you know, going back to my comment about what is there to study about equality. We have studied equality for centuries, not 2,500 years, but say more 250 years, since Fibonacci and Gini and all these Italians happen to be Italian mathematicians. There's always something new to discover. So this is something new. It's not mine, It's a colleague of mine. And in the rest of the time, I'm going to demolish it, try and demolish this idea. I want to say it's an exciting idea. It's a very interesting idea. In the rest of my time, I want to show you why there are problems with this view called positive egalitarianism. Okay, that's going to be our focus for the rest of the talk. So PE, that's positive egalitarianism. Again, the view that you don't only measure the badness of inequality, but you add to that the goodness of equal relations in each society. I want to say that there are two outstanding objections to this. And again, please feel free, stop me anytime you think, oh, I'm losing you or you losing me, because this stuff is, it's complex also for people in the field. Okay, so one objection is called the sadistic objection or conclusion, and the other objection is called the repellent egalitarian conclusion. The names are not important.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
The positive of egalitarianism
Yeah.
is part of the additive? Is part of the additive?
Yeah, good point. It is, yes. So Gini was on the average method. This is on the additive. In a way, my discussion here is a family quarrel within the additive camp, right? We set aside the average camp, the Ginis, and now we're just talking about the additive camp. Within that additive camp, now we're going to have a fight between the negativists and the positivists, right? Those who think it's just negative, right? Just adding relations of inequality, and the positives who say you take that and you add to that the relations of equality.
If I understood well, you said that if a working class, for example, in Mexico, is 20 million,
Yeah.
or 20 million, and all of them are equal in terms of their income, I don't know, and there is just a little quantity of high class, it's a good point because this huge working class is so huge in terms of relationships. Yes?
Yes.
So it is a good point to have a little high class.
You are, good point. You are already predicting some of the problems.
Even when the working class live in the worst situation, how don't have access to the many things.
Fantastic. You are predicting the point that I'm going to say now. I'm just going to put it in even stronger terms than what you just said. So here's the first objection, okay? On the negative view, the more relations of inequality, the worse the situation, okay? On the positive view, if you have relations of equality, that's good. And the more relations of equality you have, the better the situation, irrespective of how well off these people are, just like you said. But I'm going to make this more exaggerated, and I'm going to talk about people with lives that are worth not living. You remember yesterday, we had this diagram of people below the zero line. Absurdly, this view would tell us it is good, in at least one respect, to bring into the world individuals, kids, with horrible, terrible lives, so far as they are equal to each other, because we are counting these relations of equality, and that improves the situation. And that, my friends, is absurd, right? So that's an absurd conclusion, and we call it this fancy name, the sadistic conclusion, right? There's it tells us to bring about those individuals who are going to suffer just because we get a better score in terms of equality, and that cannot be. Good. How are they going to reply to that? So 3 strategies of reply that advocates of positive egalitarianism can mount here. And you know, in philosophy, Sometimes the replies and the potential replies, as you know, are more interesting than the objection themselves because they reveal something interesting about the different contrasting views. Okay. So there's going to be 3 such strategies. Let's start with the first one, the restrictive approach. Okay. So the restrictive approach says, no, wait. You got us wrong. We never thought of applying our theory to lives that lie below the 0 line. We're only talking about lives above the 0 line, lives that are worth living, okay? And some people say that. Problem with that is that it's a bit ad hoc, okay? It's like saying, somebody said that about something else, that equality is valuable, but only on Wednesdays, right? That's an ad hoc. You cannot say something like that. Equality is good, or relations of equality are good, only so far as people are having lives with positive values. Why? Because it suits your theory? That's not good enough, right? So that's a little bit ad hoc.
Because it's ethically correct.
It's not about that. It fixes a problem. So the definition of something being ad hoc is that it fixes something in your theory, but there's just no explanation to it. There's no justification. There's no story behind it. You got to have a story. It's exactly like saying, equality is valuable, but only on Wednesday, right? It just doesn't work. It has to make sense. So one other thing they say, which is a little bit better, is that, okay, fine. So this idea of us that relations of equality have positive value, it applies across the board. Fine. We're not going to be restrictive in that. But when the relations happen to be not between working class, but really between people who are below the 0 line, then we're going to assign it a 0 value. It's not going to add to the goodness of the situation. So in a sense, we're going to have like a function of value and relations, 2 people who are equal to each other, that's going to have a value, but that value will drop as the level of the life of these people drop, and when it comes to the 0 line of existence, then it will cease to have any value at all. That's better. I admit it's better, but it's still ad hoc. It's still ad hoc until you get an answer, okay, so why does this function behave in this way? We need a story. For anything in ethics, that's a lesson for life, you need a story. You need a story to back it up. You need a justification. And here we're still missing a story. So we'll keep this under a question mark. Okay, so this was the first line of defense. Here's the second line of defense, which is just to bite the bullet, right? To bite the bullet means, yeah, sure, whatever. Yes, my theory has this implication that we should things will get better if we bring into the world miserable individuals so long as they are equal to each other. But this will be good in just one respect, and there are other respects. Remember yesterday we saw a conflict in the Nagel example, we saw a conflict between the value of equality and the value of aggregate utility, right? So in one respect, things are better. All things considered, things can be worse. So this reply says, all things considered, it would be wrong to bring into existence equally situated individuals with lives that are worth not living, so horrible. But doing so, it's better in at least one respect. Now, this is a good response because it is quite similar to response that their rivals, the negative egalitarians, they give in the case of the leveling down. You remember the leveling down objection? We spent a lot of time on that yesterday. So egalitarians say about the leveling down, yeah, sure, maybe all things considered, it'd be bad to bring bring Mexico back to the days of Emilio Zapata, where everybody were equal, but everybody were dirt poor, right? So we're not going to do that. That's bad. Everything, all things considered. It would be good in one respect, with respect to equality, okay? So this is a standard philosophical response. What do I want to say in reply to this? I want to say that this response misunderstands the objection. The objection was not that positive egalitarians, they say that bringing individuals who suffer, that would be good, all things considered. No, the objection was exactly to the point that doing so is good in one respect. I'm going to say this again. What we deny is that bringing more and more relations of equality between people who suffer is good even in one respect. We think it is not good at all. And I want to try and prove that to you. So here's a thought experiment. You have in Mexico what is creeping into a US academia known as trigger alerts. You have that? Does anybody know what trigger alert is? Trigger alert is a disease of American academia. It means that if you, when you give examples and when you talk about something, you cannot give an example about rape, for example. So you have to, say if you teach criminal law. So before you talk about rape, you have to do a trigger alert, which is to say, hey, I'm going to talk about rape now. So if there's anybody here who's a victim or whatever, be prepared. Many people think it's a bit stifling of academic discussion. Or if I like to talk about the American Civil War, right? And if I quote something that Lincoln said, and it contains the N-word, I have to pause the class and I'm going to say, that's a trigger alert. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to use the N-word, right? Even though it's Lincoln said. So it's not in Mexican academia. It's good for you. Not everything that the Americans do is something that needs to be copied. Why am I talking about trigger alerts? Because in our job, especially in population ethics, a lot of the examples are not nice examples. Because they have to do with life and death and things like that. So here's another very nice example coming up. Suppose there's a couple who is in the early stages of pregnancy, okay? And they do some tests, the usual tests, and they go to the doctor, and the doctor confirms their worst suspicions, their worst nightmares, right? He's going to say, we've done some tests, and the fetus, the baby you're going to have, is going to have this, I don't know, it's going to have a Gaucher syndrome, I don't know if you know this, or things like that. It's going to have a terrible, terrible life worth not living. Most people think, most non-Catholics, I'm trying to be careful here.
Trigger alert.
Yeah. Most people think it would be, I think I'm in trouble.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So if this life is going to be really, we're not talking about regular disability, like life of misery and suffering, it'll be advisable to abort the pregnancy. Fine. Suppose then the doctor calls them back and says, I'm really sorry. There's been a terrible mistake. The fetus is going to have the same level of life that I told you, but in fact, you're going to have twins, right? It's incredible to think that this piece of information should give the parents or the doctor or anyone to say something. Well, hang on. Now this changes everything, right? There's going to be 2 new people. Yes, their life is going to be utterly terrible, but they're going to be equal to each other. Good thing. No, that's crazy. That's crazy thinking. Right? If anything, things are going to be worse, right? Because instead of one individual who's in terrible pain and suffering, you're going to have 2. So if you buy this thought experiment, the point is that there's nothing good. There's nothing good even in one aspect, in bringing into the world individuals whose life is so miserable, but they're going to be equal to each other. We just don't think equality has that kind of value. Okay. I promised you 3 responses. That was 2 of them. Here's the 3rd line of response. Again, against this sadistic conclusion, right? That positive egalitarians tell us to bring into the world miserable individuals. So long as they are equal to each other, we're going to generate more relations of equality. And this is a good objection. This is a good counter-objection, because it says, you remember yesterday we talked about leveling down. This is called imaginatively the leveling out objection. It says the following. Okay, suppose we guys, the positivists, have this sadistic conclusion that we bring into the world individuals with miserable lives. You guys do worse. You do worse because whenever there's inequality, you will resort to bumping off, to eliminating, to killing people just for the sake of equality. I mean, this sounds like a bad joke about Stalin, right? Right? You cut off heads just in order to create some sort of equality. You guys, the other camp, the negative camp, have even worse implications than we. We want to bring into life, they want to bring new life into the world. Yes, it's going to be miserable. You guys just want to out there to eliminate everyone. If we apply this to Mexico, so the objection goes, you guys will go and kill everybody who is below the absolute top level of society just in the name of equality, right? And this is going science fiction. This is going really crazy. Sorry.
One example of that could be North Korea. There are a lot of intolerance. That's the difference. If you don't have the same level of equality, you are dismissed.
Yeah, that's a good example. I think a better example would be Stalin. So the Soviet Union in the 30s with the kolkhoz and all that. So eliminating the better off people. But actually, Stalin was not a good philosopher, but he was pretty good at elimination, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Another good example. Yeah. Okay. Pretty big objection. How do we respond to that? 2 replies. We talked about the leveling down. So this was the leveling out, right? We talked about the leveling down objection yesterday. Notice that for negative egalitarians, there's no reason to kill anybody. Bear with me, let's do this slow. Suppose you have inequality. There's no reason to kill anybody. No these people, no these people. If you can do what?
Level up or level down.
Exactly. Either level up or level down. We're not out there to kill anybody. We just want an equal society. The most straightforward way of creating an equal society is just to take from the better off and give it to the worse off. There's a name for it. It's called the welfare state. Or it's called redistributive policies or progressive policies. It's something we do. Okay? We don't want to kill anybody. Okay? Leveling out will only happen if for some reason which personally I cannot think of, leveling down is impossible. Why would it be impossible to take money from the rich and give it to the poor? There's just no reason. If that reason obtained, yes, we would want to kill somebody. But now I want to take this a step further. And I want to show you, even setting that first reply aside, leveling out is not so crazy as you might think. So think of this example. So here's A and B. So A could be, what's the best country quality-wise these days? Norway, Sweden. I don't think Denmark. Who? Maybe Finland. Yeah. So Scandinavia. So let's go with Sweden just because it's a bit bigger. So suppose this is Sweden today, and suppose the Swedes are thinking of a lax population policy, where they're going to bring into existence, so there's like, say, 10 million Swedes, and they want to bring another 100,000 into the world, who we know are going to have low level of life, right? A third or a quarter. I don't think it's crazy for the Swedish state to decide, you know what? I'm good. We're good. Let's stay. Let's stay in A. We don't need to create these additional individuals. Let me give you another example. Suppose A is a utopian globe. How many are we?
7 billion.
7 billion, right? Suppose we were 7 billion, all living a very high level of welfare, living equally. If we just stick with Trump, I think we'll get there. He's a good leader. I'm kidding. I don't mean that. But suppose, wouldn't it be nice if we were there? As a universe, as a globe, if we were in A, I don't think it would be crazy for us to say, if we're going to bring more life into this world, not replenish, is that the word? Does anybody know about population policy? There's a substitution rate, more to create.
Natality, reproduction.
Yeah, but the reproduction rate is not just going to be to replace. It would be to generate more individuals. I don't think it will be crazy for the global institutions to say, we're going to stop there, we're going to keep this level of population and not bring more people into the world who are going to have lower well-being because of depleted resources. If you agree with me and you think it's not crazy, this is leveling out, right? So I've fooled you with the time element here, but this is leveling out. This is saying A is better than B. We don't want these people, okay? So leveling out is not crazy. Okay, so much for the sadistic objection. You remember I said there were two objections to this idea of positive egalitarianism. One was the sadistic objection. We saw 3 attempted replies, and I try to say what's wrong with these replies. That's it. Enough with the sadistic objection. Here's the second major objection, and it's called the Repellent Egalitarian Conclusion. Those of you who are familiar, it's a close cousin of something more famous, which is called a repugnant conclusion to utilitarianism. Put equality for the side for 1 minute, okay? If you are a utilitarian, and we are in a world with 8 billion individuals, all living equally, all living in good well-being. If you could tell me, if you just lowered the well-being for people and created more individuals, and the aggregate utility would be more. So which one would be better, A or Z on utilitarianism?
A.
But in Z, there's
The aggregate utility is more in Z.
the aggregate utility is more in Z.
Z.
So utilitarianism would have to go for this. So this is called the repugnant conclusion to utilitarianism. Right? It gives us a reason to go from this utopian world to a depleted world. It gives us a reason to go from Sweden to Bangladesh. Well, that's the example people use. Right? If there's more utility, aggregate, just because there's so many more people, even though they live terrible lives, we should go there. That was about utilitarianism. Now switch to egalitarianism. This view under consideration here says, I'm adding the number of relations of equality. That view gives us a reason to go from Sweden to Bangladesh. Why? Why? There's so many more people here. There's so many more relations of equality. So the number it gives to the value of equality, right? We're measuring equality, is higher here than it is here. And that's crazy. It's interesting that one of those people who thought about this, positive equality, is Swedish himself. So when I say, you're giving us a reason to move from Sweden to Bangladesh, you say, oh, no, I don't want to do that. So always know who your enemy is and what his weakness points. Okay, so they need to come up with some sort of a solution. You okay with this? This is tough stuff, believe me. I mean, I'm not presenting myself as a genius or something. It's like I worked hard to wrap my head around it, and you're listening to it for the first time. So if you're struggling with this, trust me, it's perfectly understandable. So stop me whenever you feel the need. So what are they going to say in reply to this? Two strategies. One is called the capped model, and the other is called the welfare level sensitive egalitarianism. Yes, it's a bit of a mouthful, but I'm going to try and explain them. So first, the capped model. Okay. Anybody knows who this is? Nice, good, yeah. It says something about our age, doesn't it? Because when I present it to my students, no idea. I mean, for us, she was a hero, right? Okay. Why is it called the capped model, and what does Nadia Comaneci have to do with it? The capped model, forget about equality. This is something new in ethics, and it's extremely exciting. The capped model says about every value that you have, everything that's good in life, you can have an approach that says that there's a cap to it, there's a ceiling to it, okay? Remember we talked yesterday, beauty, truth, friendship, knowledge, utility, equality, anything that's good, suppose there's a cap to it. Some people call it the gymnastics model. Why? Because like in gymnastics, you perform, the parallel bars, right? And you get a score. So you get a 10, right? Suppose that she does the routine on the parallel bars and she gets a 10. Suppose the next time she gets on the bars, she does even better. What's going to happen?
She's going to have 10 again.
She's still going to have a 10. And there's a cap. Okay? So it's sometimes called the gymnastics models. It's sometimes called the triathlon, decathlon. The decathlon. We're very close to the Olympic Stadium here, right? So this is appropriate. The decathlon. So in decathlon, 10 subjects, right? So you also have to give a grade to things, and there's a cap to them because you need to quantify how throwing the javelin, right, compares with throwing the discus. So you also give a score, and there's a cap. Okay. Why am I bothering you with all these sports metaphors? Because this is huge. It helps us solve many problems. Go back to this. Remember I talked about the repugnant conclusion. So utilitarians are forced to go from Sweden to Bangladesh if there's just a bit more utility. Okay. Suppose we adopted the CAP model and we said we're going to give a score on anything, on beauty, aesthetics, right? On truth, on friendship, on utility. Suppose this is not Sweden, suppose this is the world, okay? And the world has 10 billion people. 10, I give you 10. Globe, I give you a 10 with regard to utility. You've scored the highest score in terms of utility. Generating more population is not going to help you. Why?
Resources are limited.
Go back to the CAP model. On utilitarianism, why do I not need to generate more life, more utility? I've already scored 10. Okay? This is like Nadia Comaneci. This is ethics, people, okay? So we're doing ethics and we want to do values. And we say, what is the value of utility? So if the world already contains 10 billion people living very high level of welfare, I'm going to give it a grade. And I'm going to give it a grade of 10. That's it. That's the best you can do. So don't start doing this. So this CAP model solves one of the most persistent problems in philosophy, namely this repugnant conclusion. It is true for utility. It can also be true for equality. Why? So Sweden. Hey Sweden, I'm giving you the grade of 10 with regard to equality. Look, you guys, there's many of you, there's enough people of you, you live in a very high level of welfare and you're all perfectly equal to each other, you're going to get the grade of 10. I got the grade of 10. I don't need to generate more individuals, more relations of equality. Fantastic, fantastic solution. I wish it was mine. It would have given me a job at NYU or something like that. It's not mine. Okay. So what's wrong with it? Okay, I've settled this. Two things are wrong with it. Whatever you might think of the CAP model, this gymnastics model, it's controversial. Right? It's a bit controversial to say there's a limit to how good things are. Right? I can use a metaphor from relationships, right? Because I said also for friendship, if you say to your partner, trigger alert. This gets, suppose you say to your partner, hey, I learned about this CAP model. You know, our relationship, you know, the frequency of the gifts we give each other and all that, hugs and kisses. Pretty good. We've reached 10. There's no more room for improvement. Try this at home. See how your partner reacts to this. We've reached the cap. There's no higher. You know, I shouldn't strive for better. So it's a bit controversial. So whatever you think of it, notice that, right, we're contrasting the positive egalitarians with the negative egalitarians. The negative egalitarians, they don't need it. Now I'm going to ask you, why don't they need it? They have a cap a natural cap built into it. What is it? Anybody can tell me? There is a cap for negative egalitarians, those who say the value of equality is only about, relations of inequality. They have a cap. What is that cap? Anybody wants to try? 0. 0. When a society is perfectly equal, on the negative view, right? This is a society that's perfectly equal. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. There's 0 inequality. So that society has reached its cap. Unlike the other account, that cap is not artificial at all. It's natural. It's built into the theory. I'll say this again. On the traditional view, the negative view of equality, that's what's bad is inequality. Once we've eliminated inequality, that's our cap. That's 0 inequality. That's the best we can do. There's nothing more than we could do. Just keep it that way. I mean, no society that we know of has reached this. I mean, sometimes they talk about the Ghana. Anybody knows anything about Ghana in Africa? Yes, but what's unique about Ghana? Does anybody know?
It's a tax haven.
Okay, I did not know that.
You didn't know that?
No, I did not know that. What I'm referring to is that Ghana is unique in having traditional economic sector that is matriarchal. So it's the women who go to the market. The men are the farmers. No, the men are the farmers, but the women are the ones who take the produce to the market. That's not so important. What's important is that the women control the money. Okay, so they talk about Ghana, but that was then, I don't know today, as maybe the most egalitarian society. Why am I talking about Ghana? Okay, yeah. So once you reached this utopia, that's the cap. That's the one thing to notice about the cap model. The other thing to notice about the cap model is that it works well with positive levels. Remember, I said this has to do with anything in value theory, not just equality, also with utility, with anything. It works pretty well with positive values. I'm now going to try and tell you that it doesn't work so well with negative values. So imagine that this is the world we live in, A. It's utter hell. It's like a Hieronymus Bosch painting, this Hieronymus Bosch. I think it's how you pronounce it.
Bosco.
Bosco? Yeah, with depicting scenes from hell, people being fried by demons and stuff, right? Suppose this is our existence. Terrible. Suppose there's 8 billion people being fried in hell. And then suppose we're thinking, should we add to that another million to be fried in hell? Well, you know what? That would be worse. That would be worse. Yeah. Suppose you have 1,000 children suffering, God forbid. Should I add another child suffer? What is another child give or take? No, it's worse. It's worse. What this tells you is that we may think there's a cap on how good things are. But when it comes to how bad things are, right, this almost sounds like a title of a song. Things can always get worse. Right? Take this home with you as the lesson from these 2 days. Things can always get worse. When it comes to negative stuff, things can always, there's no cap to how bad things are.
I don't understand why in the negative approach there are no cap. So you're telling us that always could be worse, the negative approach. And why is that? Why only applies for a negative and not for a positive?
Because when we talked about the negative approach to egalitarianism, remember, is the approach that just adds relations of inequality. It says, with regard to relations of equality, that doesn't change anything. That was the negative approach.
Yes.
Okay?
And it's additive.
It's additive. Yes.
But why only applies and it could be right in the negative approach and not in the positive. The additive model and the no-cap model. Why only?
Because on the negative approach, once you have reached a completely equal society, that is the cap. So that's the perfect society. You cannot improve. Yeah, you cannot improve. You cannot get a better score on that. That's by definition. Okay. On the positive, because every pair of individuals who are equal to each other adds, there's no limit. Okay, so that's why the positivists, that's why they need this cap. Okay? So this is a very interesting insight, and it's actually, it might point out to a psychological thing. Okay, so I was talking about ethics, how this cap model might help us. But some people have said, when they thought about this, that maybe the whole cap model just comes from a failure, a psychological failure, might be something evolutionary in us. That when it comes to good things, we can say, oh, exactly, this is good enough. When it comes to bad things, psychologically, we never say that's bad enough. Things can always get bad. And you know, in philosophy, we don't like asymmetry, we like symmetry. And if you think that means that probably what we thought about the caps of how good things are was incorrect. It's just a failure of our imagination. If you think your relationship with your loved one is perfect, you're wrong. It can always improve, the same as it can always sink and deteriorate. Yeah, and on that happy note. So it's true for relationships, it's true for utilitarianism, it's true, and this is the punchline of this, for equality. So even when Obama was president, the US was pretty bad in terms of inequality, right? Among the OECD, it's one of the worst. If you think things are bad, just wait. After Obama, comes along this other guy, and surprise, surprise, things can get worse. Okay? They can get worse with regard to utility. They can get worse with regard to equality. Okay. I have one more, but I don't know if I should. I mean, I have this other solution, but I don't know. I feel like I spoke.
Open it up for.
Yeah,
questions?
maybe I open it up now, and
Maybe come back
if
to
there's
that.
more.
Lo podemos abrir a discusión, preguntas, cuestiones de clarificación que necesiten. Con mucho gusto el doctor está con la mejor disposición. Sí.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you go back?
Oh, yeah, sure.
The last one. Back one. Okay. You presented us an example. If we are the best one we can be, why do we need more? You presented just a line, slim and short, and the others.
This one?
In the blue one.
Ah,
And the question
okay,
was-
yeah.
was, if we are at the top, the new ones will be in low
Low,
position.
yeah.
And here they are worse equal.
Yeah,
It is just
just a coincidence. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
but,
if I go
maybe
back-
probably the new ones can go better. Yes, this one.
So you
You
think
ones are
these
worse.
could be as
Yes,
high
It's
as?
just an example. It's just just
Well,
a mistake?
if they are as high as this, then they just, it adds, they're on equal level.
Yeah.
The point here was that we may resist bringing more population into more people into the population if they generate new inequality. Here, there's no inequality. So, but you're right, I could have put them up here, and it's the same. Yes, it's the same. I'll give you a famous example of this. So some people say, I spent a couple of years at Harvard School of Public Health, so talking about health a lot, and there they have all sorts of science fiction scenarios, okay? So, and they asked us, so they said, suppose we invent this pill that's an immortality, I think I pressed something, oh, okay. That is an immortality pill. You live forever. Or you know what, you live twice as much as not the average, as the normal Homo sapiens, right? So you live 200 years. Yeah, okay. The point is, you cannot give it to everybody. It's very expensive, it's very rare. So you give it to 1% of the population. Should we do it? Good question, right? So on the one hand, it breaks this barrier to humanity. There's a new frontier. I mean, imagine all the things you can do in 200 years, all the books you can read, all the ski trips you can go to, all the bird watching expeditions you can go to. Just a hypothetical example. On the other hand, look at what you've produced. I'm going along with what you said, right? So something here, the line would be here. I mean, you're creating a new society with what amounts to humans and superhumans. Do we want to live in a society that has this radical inequality in it? I alluded to it yesterday, when I talked about the Malawi man and the Japanese woman. So this is my way of making stark the inequality. It is as if we have two species of people in the universe. We used to have two species of humans. People forget that. But that was 35,000 years ago, okay? The Homo sapiens and the Neanderthals roaming the earth together. Do we want to go back to a situation where we have two species? And this is roughly what we have today, with levels of health in some countries and level of life expectancy in other countries. So that's one example. Here, this immortality pill would be just as bad. So I think my answer to that question was, no, we don't want to go there.
And I have another question. Who defines the cap? I mean, always will be people with high income, with a higher income than the others, because money has no limit. So is the cap of the equality measured by economic bank account? I mean, how much money you have or not?
No,
it's not the way we measure it.
No, good question. So, but it's not. The idea is it's a more philosophical idea. So the same with utility. So when philosophers talk about population policies or overpopulation policies, they are asked to say, what will be good enough just in terms of populating the earth? I'm not an expert on that, but I think you can give a pretty good answer to that question. What would be good enough in terms of numbers of people living on this earth at one point. And I think the same can be done with the positive value of equality. So you may be hinting to the aspect that it's a bit vague, you're right, but I think you can give an answer.
¿Alguna otra pregunta o cuestión? Comentarios o cuestiones que pueda aclarar el profesor.
Difficult stuff, right?
Difficult stuff. He has another
I
question.
would like if you can clarify a little bit more the difference between negative egalitarianism and positive egalitarianism.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so that, because that's important here. So the negative egalitarianism, that's the standard traditional view of measurement, okay? Where this whole talk is about measuring inequality and measuring the badness of inequality. So the standard view was you just add the numbers of relations of inequality. Every person who's unequal to another person, you take that gap and you add it. Remember, this is not pure philosophy. We live in a global order that does the same, but puts an average on it. That's the Gini, okay? So we're very familiar about these gaps and how to take them. By the way, so the Gini, everything here represents welfare, happiness, because I happen to think that's the important thing. Gini doesn't do that, and that's probably one of the things with Gini. What does the line represent with Gini?
Average? Or
No, but when you look at a person, what does it look at that person? What is it? Of his happiness or something else? Income. Income, right? That's what economists know. Right? It could be pre-tax income, or it could be post-tax income. It doesn't matter, okay? So we want to think of happiness or well-being. So the negative, they just look at gaps. The positives, they look at gaps, but they also look at relations of equality. And they say that has to be factored into the grade that we give a society, how egalitarian that society is. You know what, let me give you I can go through if there aren't more questions, I can go through, remember there was this solution. Should I go through?
Yeah.
We have more time?
Sure.
Yeah, and that may generate more questions. Okay, so remember the problem, the problem was this, right? So the positive egalitarians, they are forced to go to recommend to policymakers moving from Sweden-like society to a Bangladesh-like society, just because there's so many relations of equality that we add, and that gives us a positive number, okay? And I said one way of avoiding this was to put a cap, okay? We've dealt with that. Here's another way of dealing with it. The other way is no less ingenious, is to say, we create a function. Okay, this goes a bit mathematical, but not overly so. We create a function whereby we aggregate, let's do this slow, we aggregate relations of equality, we give them a positive value, but the higher they are in terms of level of well-being, the greater the factor we give them, okay? So, if we have two individuals living this high level of well-being to each other, I'm going to give it a particular factor. If we have two individuals living low, I'm going to give it a lower factor. So it then turns out that if you have fewer relations, but if you give them 1.5 factor, the aggregate number here is going to be greater than the aggregate number here, because here you gave that relationship, you gave it a lower factor. Okay? See the interconnection now between philosophy and economics. Okay, so that solution we call welfare level sensitive egalitarianism. The value of the equal relationship is sensitive to how high the welfare level. Okay, what is wrong with that? And I'm really going to end with that. It's not like the Rolling Stones who perform, they go out, you clap hands, it comes out for another song, goes out. I'm not going to come back for another song, okay? This is the... Okay, so I've said this. What's wrong with it? You remember that I said everything in philosophy has to have a story. You cannot just plug in solutions just because it fits you have a problem and it fixes your problem. No, you got to have a story to back it up. And here, there's a story missing because, okay, the solution says relations of equality are better when they are at the top compared to relations of inequality that are in the bottom. But that goes against a common intuition that we have. We think, and I'm happy to hear what you think about it, but we commonly think the relations of equality are more important at the bottom than they are at the top. Let me say it a different way. Inequality is morally more troublesome when it occurs at the bottom than when it occurs at the top. And I'm going to try and prove it to you in two ways, okay? But as I say, I'm happy to hear your thoughts about this. One way is that whenever I go to conferences and I get questions from people who are anti-egalitarians, they often give this example about the inequality between Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, right? So the two top most richest persons on the planet, but there's an inequality between them. So you're an egalitarian. Should we fix that inequality as well? They say to me as a caricature, right? Yeah, exactly. So if you're offended by inequality, here, that's also inequality. Should we fix that? Okay. I happen to think there are replies that one can reply to that. But what that objection says is that when we think about inequalities, people say inequality at the top, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really bother me. Yeah. Who are the top two richest people in Mexico? Maybe next time I'm invited.
Slim. Carlos Slim.
Ah, of course. Yeah, he's famous.
Famous. And ¿qué sería el?
But what did they do? I mean.
¿Cuál sería el segundo? ¿El Salinas Pliego? ¿O quién?
También Salinas Pliego o Carlos Salinas de
They're into TV and communications.
Moguls.
Moguls,
Yeah. Okay. So next time I'm invited, if I'm invited, next time I can use that. So that tells you that this solution that the positivists came up with, it just goes against the intuition that we have. It's exactly the opposite. I should give higher grade to equality at the bottom than I do at the top. It goes exactly against what they say. Here's the other way to show this. So consider this inequality. Just this very simplified example. In A and B, what is similar between these two societies?
The difference between each other.
Exactly. The gap is exactly the same between these two societies. But look, the worse off people in society B, right, we can think of it as a class of people, or I don't know, you can think of it as whites and African Americans, right? Whites and African Americans. I wished we lived in a US that was a bit like B, that there was a gap between the whites and the blacks. Why? Because then I could say the blacks in the US control almost as much as half of the resources of the US. I wish we lived in that society. Of course we don't live in that society. In B, the worse off hold almost half of the resources of their societies. The worse off in A, they own how much? A third, right? They own a third of the resources of their societies. In other words, shares matter. It's not just the gap. It's not the absolute gap. It is the share of what people hold in the society. So if the working class people in Mexico, they have a certain gap from the middle class, that's significant, okay. But I want to know what percentage of the GDP in Mexican society they hold. Because it could be a third, or it could be a tenth, or it could be almost half. That matters. Morally speaking, that matters. And what that tells you is that this is simple math. The lower the inequality, the worse it is, right? The higher the inequality, if the gap is still the same, the higher the inequality, the greater the share held by the worse off people. The lower the inequality, the smaller the share of the resources held by the worse off. So this is a proof that the solution that they propose, my enemies, just goes exactly against the common intuition that we have, that shares matter. Okay, I'm going to skip this. Now I'm going to really, this is the last slide. So, you can say, all right, you've said all this, and if you're right about every bit of argument, then yes, we accept that this view, positive egalitarianism, doesn't work. But wait a second. I mean, isn't the idea behind positive egalitarianism, is there something to it, right? Is there something intuitive? There's the badness of inequality, and then there's the goodness of equality. And then we just join them together. What went wrong here? Here's what went wrong, I think. So you may be familiar with this saying. This is a very famous anti-utilitarian quip by this guy called Jan Narveson. Okay, so he said, why is utilitarianism so false? Because they misunderstood the following bit, that there's value in making individuals happy, but there's no value in making happy individuals, right? So you see the difference. If they are individuals, the world as it is, you have an obligation to make these people as happy as they are. But there's no obligation to create happy individuals, right? To bring into the world more and more, right? If we all believed in utilitarianism, we would not stop having children, right? Because you would create more and more utilities, positive utilities. But most of us don't think that way, all right? So Narveson is pointing out what is wrong here. I actually think he's wrong about this, but set it aside. I think there's something correct here about egalitarianism, and that this was actually first said by a political philosopher from Spain, Julia Mosquera. She said that there's value in making societies equal, but there's no value in making equal societies. So if we have societies, the societies that we have, and they are unequal, so our job as philosophers, as egalitarians, as social activists, is to rectify the situation, right? We should make societies equal. We shouldn't make equal societies. We shouldn't just generate a new society or bring into existence more and more people just so that they are equal. And that's where this idea of positive egalitarianism goes wrong. It goes wrong in that it misses out on a key feature of egalitarianism, which is fairness. So fairness has to do with, if there is inequality out there, you need to deal with it. You don't need to generate equality out of that. Okay. I'll finish here. So hopefully that generates more
discussion.
questions. We have a few more minutes.
We do. ¿Alguna cuestión o pregunta adicional para el profesor? Sí. No sé si necesites el micrófono o no sea necesario. No sé si lo están grabando. ¿No? Adelante.
My question goes to the very beginning. So I think what wasn't clear for me was if we think that taking population into account is important, because if there are more people with the same gap between them, then we're producing more people in a bad situation. That is bad.
Mm-hmm.
How would it work if, for whatever reason, we had less people and the same gap? I mean, if we moved in the additive realm of things.
That's the very first.
That's the very
Yeah.
first thing. If we had less people and we have the same gap, in my intuition, that would still be bad. But if we added that, compared to the situation, to the original situation, that would be so bad. So what happens in that sense?
Okay, very interesting. So it's a very interesting thought experiment. So it's open to interpretation. My interpretation would be that it's always bad when there are these huge gaps, but if the society actually grows smaller, I would say things have gotten better with regard to equality. I mean, it plays a trick on our intuition here, because we have negative connotations about societies that are this large and then they happen to be shrinking, because we're thinking something bad is happening. But if you set that out of the equation, right, because we think the natural course of things is that societies grow. But that's a foreign element here. We need to set it aside. Just the fact of the inequality, the gap staying the same, the society grows smaller, I think, yes, my intuition is the inequality is getting a bit better. But I admit it's hard to wrap our head around it. That's a good point. By the way, you can ask questions. This concludes the 2 days. So, also about yesterday.
Cuestiones de hoy, incluso de ayer, sí.
I have a question about the issue that I think that we are talking about philosophy, not economics. You said that we need to, so in that term, I think that we need first to define what is welfare, because we're talking about levels, we're talking about numbers, we're putting everything into the numbers, and we haven't yet defined what is welfare, because I think, like yesterday, it's very abstract to know what is well or what is not. For it depends on the context, it depends on the people, it depends on the culture and the time and the age. So in that abstract position, how can we achieve to define in a very close level to what is well and what is welfare, not for economics, but for the philosopher and ethics?
Yeah, that's a huge question. But first of all, it's both for philosophers and economists. I mean, part of what I was trying to do here was not to denounce the economists, rather to say there's a collaboration between the two disciplines that has to take place, right? The philosophers cannot replace the economists in measurements, right? The economists are best in measurements. The role of the philosopher is to inform the economist, what is it exactly that you need to measure, okay? And you need to measure something that tracks value. You need to know what's good and what's bad in life in order to go about measuring them. If you want, you can look at the introduction in the Nobel Prize ceremony. When Gary Becker got the prize, they talk about his contribution and how from just talking about salaries or monetary policy, suddenly economists, due to Gary Becker, can talk about crime, can talk about education. Gary Becker is the first to talk about the economy, the economics of education, to talk about discrimination. He has a book just about discrimination of African Americans. So for an economist, we're talking the 50s and 60s, for an economist to talk about discrimination, that was huge, okay? But not everybody is Gary Becker, so every economist needs to have a philosopher friend. Go along with him.
Joseph Stiglitz did the same.
Yeah, could be.
The relation between.
But I want to say something about what you said. So, both today and yesterday, I had these cubes or rectangulars that represent welfare, and you're absolutely right. I did not say what they contain or how we measure them, because I just assumed it for the sake of discussion. And there's tons and tons of literature just on that. Some of you may be familiar with happiness studies, right? So that's like a side field of this field of measuring welfare. One thing I would say about this, you said, doesn't the measurement of welfare depend on culture? Here, I would be very careful, okay? Because we have experience with what we call subjective measurements of well-being. And the huge, huge problem of subjective measurements of well-being is that they discriminate against the developing world, okay? Why do they do that? Because people have subjective well-being that is sensitive to their culture and to what they are accustomed to get in life. And of course, the lower the standard of living in a society, the lower the expectations of people in that society will be. So that might be good when you conduct domestic research or domestic policies, right? I want to boost well-being in Burkina Faso, okay? That could be fine. But if you work or you advise the WHO, World Health Organization, as we, on one occasion, we did, and you have policies that are spanning the globe, if you adopt subjective measurements, you're going to consistently discriminate against people in the developing world in favor of people in the developed world.
¿Alguna otra pregunta o comentario, sugerencia? No? Well, I have a question.
Sure.
Real, like down earth. At one point, you mentioned this would be helpful for policymakers, and
Yeah.
so regarding the issue of migration, right? If you have a really well-off and equal society, but if you bring people and you accept people from developing worlds into that.
Thank you. It's been great.
into that
That's the
society.
question I didn't want to hear.
You didn't want
No,
to.
no, sorry.
And you
I'm kidding.
bring those questions. I was thinking about this that had a relation with the leveling out and stuff. But if you bring those people, that creates a worse off society, and it's more of a unequal society. What would you recommend to a policymaker regarding open borders and not on that point?
Good point. Good. So, I do have an answer. You noticed that in many of the examples, when I tried to breathe life into them, I said, this is Sweden versus Bangladesh, or this is just not just rectangulars. And then I switched from countries, Sweden versus Bangladesh, or this is the world, the globe, as it is, compared to the globe as it could be. Okay? That's exactly the point. So the question, and again, that's another huge question, is what is the reference group when we talk about equality or inequality? Is it domestic?
Okay, or world.
Or is it global? Okay, and of course my answer is it's global. Domestic is of course important, but the importance of global inequalities the importance of domestic inequalities pale in comparison to global inequalities. And we touched on that when we talked about life expectancy and things like that. How does that bear on immigration? And this is actually maybe more pertinent than you think, because, for example, we mentioned Sweden a lot. Just because Sweden is also, it's not just an egalitarian country with an egalitarian ethos, but it's also a country that is post-materialist in the sense that their democracy is so advanced that they do actually talk about these things, right? So in Sweden, they have thought and pondered the effect on inequality of allowing all these Syrian and Iraqi immigrants. So yes, we have almost a perfect egalitarian society, and we're bringing all these people, which will inevitably result in a more unequal society. That's a minus. Okay. But when you adopt a more global outlook and you bring in refugees from places where their life prospects are terrible to a country that can allow them better life prospects, you are alleviating, you're lowering global inequality. So that's the answer. So you need to figure out what's more important. Is it the domestic or is it the global? By the way, good point. One of the things that are bad about purely economic measurements is that they will not give Sweden points, Sweden or any other country that accepted Germany, right? Accepted 800,000 Syrians, I think, right? These economic indices that are published, they're not going to give points to Sweden or Germany for accepting all these refugees. They're going to give it negative points, right? So that's something to be said about economic measurements, that they are very narrow and they don't capture the whole point. Okay. Same with Mexico. I don't know. I mean, okay, now I'm venturing. There was a time when you guys allowed a lot of Guatemalans into this country, and now that time is almost stopped. So in a sense, it reflects in the opposite way. You did a good thing.
We're in the US war.
Yeah. So you did a good thing by accepting Guatemalan refugees, but your inequality indices have gone worse. So do you look at the domestic or you look at the global? That's the question. Yeah.
See.
Do we know which are the organizations which made these measures about equality in the globe using this
The global
global equality.
approach. Are there any organizations measuring the global aspect of equality, not only the domestic
Using
one?
these topics.
There must be. I'm not sure. You know, in general, there is the UN. What's it called? DMG. UN. Does anybody know the MG stands for Millennial Goals. So when it was the millennium. Oh, was it in Mexico? Okay. When it was the millennium, there was a UN convention. Maybe it was in Cancun. I don't know. I don't know if that's the one where they established goals for the millennium for 2020. Actually, it's now. It's now. But what's interesting about them is they were informed by more advanced philosophy. Amartya Sen, who you mentioned yesterday, is one of the people who was more influential about this. So if you look at the UN goals for the millennium, 2020, you might find something about global indices of inequality.
Now they are the Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, Sustainable Goals or something like that.
Estos no son mis territorios, pero
I didn't understand.
¿Cómo lo di? ¿Cómo se llama?
Now they are the
Yes.
Sustainable Goals.
Ándale.
2030 agenda.
So it's been updated to.
Ya.
Okay.
¿Alguna otra cuestión? ¿No? Pues estamos justo en tiempo, son las 12. Muchísimas gracias de nuevo.
Thank you.
Les pido darle un aplauso al profesor.
Thank you all.
Y le vamos a otorgar esta constancia por parte del doctor Pedro Salazar, director del Instituto, y un servidor, por su valiosa participación como ponente en el Seminario Internacional Justice and Population Ethics.
Oh, wow. Thank you. This is awesome.
Gracias a todos. Hasta nuevo aviso, a ver qué más organizamos y qué más se nos ocurre. Gracias.
Yeah, I'm good. But it was never like a weakness or anything. It's just stuff itself. I guess since I stopped. No, nothing. So I guess once I stopped eating.
Things are, knock on wood.
I'm not gonna put any.
No, it's preferable until later on the day. Yeah. Sí. Claro.
Y bueno, ellos tienen fotos mejores, pero esta es como el final del
Tómenos una foto. Iris wants to take a picture.
Yeah. Did you take a photo with that? With the.
She took the video yesterday
No,
after
with
Spanish.
that thing. Did you take a photo?
Oh, no.
No, we can do that.
Yeah.
Where should we stand?
Ahí, okay. Sí. Es una reportera ahí. Sí, por favor, al WhatsApp también.
What is Constancia?
There, certifying that something happened. Certificate, yeah.
Y este lo voy a dejar aquí porque ayer ni me abrieron.
Sí, claro. No. Sí.
Que pues hay que cuidar algunas cosillas.
Sí, sí, pero para que me digas, porque la verdad es que siempre he sido un lobo solitario en el...
No, sí, siempre mejor así, mejor. Entre más cabezas, mejor las cosas.